Situated in the Rocky Mountains at Kicking Horse Pass are some of the Canadian Pacific Railway's most remarkable engineering achievements, the spiral tunnels. Carved deep into the mountains through some of the most challenging terrain in the Rockies, these tunnels were celebrated as one of the greatest engineering wonders of the time. When British Columbia joined the Confederation in 1871, it was on the condition that a railway would be built to connect the province to the rest of the country. Building a railway across such a large continent was a massive undertaking. Sanford Fleming was offered the chief engineer post on the Canadian Pacific Survey. In 1872, he set out with a small party to survey the route. Focusing especially on the passage through the Rocky Mountains, he identified a suitable route through the Yellowhead Pass. Amid years of soaring construction costs and political scandals, the Minister of Railways and Canals, Charles Tupper, was tasked with reining in expenses. However, by May 1880, Tupper was unable to control the situation and was forced to remove Sanford Fleming as chief engineer. Shortly after, George Stephen, representing a syndicate, approached Tupper with a proposal to take over the railway's construction. The syndicate succeeded in establishing the Canadian Pacific Railway in February 1881 and assumed responsibility for completing the railway soon after. Construction was advancing too slowly for railway officials, prompting them in 1882 to hire renowned railway executive William Cornelius Van Horn. Attracted by the offer of a generous salary and the challenging of managing such a complex railway project, Van Horn took on the task of accelerating progress. It was initially assumed that the railway would pass through the fertile lands of North Saskatchewan River Valley, known as the Fertile Belt, and cross the Rocky Mountains via the Yellowhead Pass. This route had been recommended by Sanford Fleming after nearly a decade of extensive research and planning. However, the CPR quickly discarded this plan in favor of a more southerly route across the arid Pallisers Triangle in Saskatchewan and via Kicking Horse Pass and down the Field Hill to the Rocky Mountain Trench. This route was more direct and closer to the Canada-US border, making it easier for the CPR to keep American railways from encroaching on the Canadian market. However, this route also had several disadvantages. One significant challenge was identifying a viable route through the Selkirk Mountains in British Columbia, as it was uncertain whether such a route even existed. The task was given to surveyor Major Albert Bowman Rogers, with the CPR promising him $5,000 and the honor of naming the pass after him if he succeeded. Driven by the desire for lasting recognition, Rogers discovered the pass in April 1881. True to its promise, the CPR named it Rogers Pass and presented him with a check for $5,000. However, Rogers chose not to cash the check, framing it instead, saying his motivation was not for the money. He eventually agreed to cash it in exchange for an engraved watch. Another challenge was that the proposed route passed through the land in Alberta controlled by the Blackfoot First Nation. This obstacle was resolved when a missionary priest convinced Blackfoot Chief Crowfoot that the railway's construction was unavoidable. In recognition of his agreement, Crowfoot was famously granted a lifetime pass to travel on the CPR. The biggest challenge of the route was in Kicking Horse Pass. Located just west of the BC-Alberta border, over the first 6 kilometers west of the summit, the Kicking Horse River drops 350 meters. A proposed plan to construct a tunnel through Mount Stephen, which would have reduced the steepness of the railway's grade, was ultimately abandoned to avoid delays and cost overruns. Instead, permission was granted to build this section of the railway with a steep grade as a temporary measure. This steep descent required the Canadian Pacific Railway to construct a 7-kilometer stretch of track with an exceptionally steep 4.5% gradient upon reaching the pass. This grade was more than twice as steep as the recommended standard for a mountain pass railway, even by today's measures. However, it offered a much more direct route compared to the Yellowhead Pass, saving significant time for both passengers and freight. Construction began on what would become known as the Big Hill. Unfortunately, the first construction train to travel down the pass lost control and plunged into the Kicking Horse River, resulting in the tragic deaths of 3 workers. To improve safety, 3 spur lines were created to divert such runaway trains. The switches were left set for the spurs and weren't reset to the main line until the switchman confirmed that the oncoming train was under control. While descending the big hill posed challenges, uphill trains faced issues as well. Extra locomotives were required to help push the trains up the hill, leading to delays and the need for additional workers. The town of Field, originally known simply as Third Siding, was created as a work camp solely to accommodate the CPR's need for additional locomotives to be added to trains about to tackle the big hill. The CPR built a turntable and a roundhouse at Field. An adjacent roundhouse was used to store and maintain the fleet of helper locomotives that assisted trains over the big hill. At the time, standard steam locomotives were 440s, capable enough for the prairies and elsewhere, but of little use on the big hill. Baldwin Locomotive Works was called upon to build a pair of 280s for use as field hill pusher engines in 1884. At the time, they were the most powerful locomotives built. 2 more followed in June of 1886. The CPR began building its own 280s in August 1887, and over the years hundreds more were built or bought. Speed was restricted to 8 miles per hour for passenger trains and 6 miles per hour for freight, and elaborate brake testing was required of trains prior to descending the hill. Nevertheless, disasters occurred with dismaying frequency. Although the Kicking Horse Pass was a complication for the CPR, it was an inspiration to the many tourists who started to arrive by train. In an effort to preserve the landscape and encourage tourism, CP promoted the creation of Mount Stephen Dominion Reserve in 1886. The park was renamed Yoho in 1901. By the early 1900s, increased traffic over the line made it imperative that something had to be done about the frequent accidents and expensive helper engines associated with the big hill. Engineers were faced with the problem of space due to the steep mountainsides on both sides of the pass. Several alternatives were considered, including the passes that were scouted and ignored years earlier. The solution for a more gradual grade came from J.E. Schwitzer, one of the railway's assistant chief engineers. He found inspiration from the loop tunnels of the St. Gothard Railway in Switzerland. The plan Schwitzer came up with was to create 2 spiral tunnels into the mountains to gain the length needed to reduce the tracks to an acceptable grade. The result of the project would have the tunnels reduce the gradient of the track from 4.5% down to a maximum of 2.2%. Construction of the tunnels involved cutting through crystallized limestone, with the hardness and the brittleness of the rock varying every few feet, making drilling operations extremely challenging. These difficulties were further complicated by water seepage through rock crevices, which slowed progress, as well as the high altitude and harsh winter weather, which added to the already tough working conditions for the men. An incredible feat of engineering is the precision of these tunnels, that when they bored them, at just over half a mile each, starting from either end, they were off on one tunnel by only 1.5 feet when the 2 ends connected, and by only 6 inches on the other. The new line through the spiral tunnels, hailed as an engineering marvel, opened to traffic on August 25, 1909, replacing the dangerous temporary Big Hill line after 25 years of use. Although the new route effectively doubled the length of track, it significantly reduced the steep grade to 2.2%, which, while still considered steep for a main line, made the route much safer and more efficient. With this improvement, 2 engines of the same class as the 4 previously required could haul heavier loads over the pass by means of this engineering marvel. Although the spiral tunnels were a great improvement for the grade, rockfall, mudslides, and avalanches are some of the challenges still faced today. On average, 25 to 30 trains pass through the spiral tunnels daily. With train lengths of over 2.5 kilometers long, trains entering the lower tunnel will cross over themselves upon exit and make their way up the other side of the valley before the rear of the train disappears into the mountainside. Even with the reduced grade, accidents still occur. There have been dozens of mostly minor derailments over the last 20 years. However, on February 4th, 2019, after losing its brakes, a train came barreling down the spiral tunnels, out of control at over 80 kilometers an hour. In total, 99 of the train's 112 cars left the tracks, killing the 3 crew members on board. There are 2 viewpoints where you can watch the trains navigate the tunnels. From the viewpoint 7.4 kilometers east of Field on the Trans-Canada Highway, you can see the lower spiral tunnel in Mount Ogden. The upper spiral tunnel in Cathedral Mountain can be seen from the pull-off 2.3 kilometers up the Yoho Valley Road. As you drive on the Trans-Canada Highway near the spiral tunnel viewpoints, you're actually following the path once known as the Big Hill. The Trans-Canada Highway descends the eastern portion of the Big Hill and its 4.5% grade. In fact, the last Howe Truss Bridge over the Kicking Horse River, now referred to as the Old Bridge, still stands beside the highway today.